What do most Fortune 500 executives have in common? They learned important lessons on the fields and courts of their high school and collegiate sports teams. This is true for both men and women. Ernst & Young found that a whopping 94% of women holding a C-suite position played sports. Their wins and losses shaped their habits and who they would become. Join me on my journey to sit with some of the brightest executives in the world as we discuss how sports shaped their professional trajectory. In partnership with Chief Executive Magazine, the voice of America's CEO community, I'm your host, Don Yeager, and this is Corporate Competitor Podcast. This month, the podcast will bring you lessons from 4 incredible military leaders. With me for today's episode is General Maryanne Miller, the first woman to serve as Chief of the Air Force Reserve. She has nearly 5,000 hours of experience flying jets, large cargo planes, and aerial refueling tankers. In the fall of 2001, she had plans to retire. But the September 11th terrorist attacks changed the trajectory of her career. A story she will share here today that will give you chills.
That morning, I was upstairs getting ready, and I remember just standing there watching the airplane go into the first tower. This was a Tuesday. That Friday, I had called the Air Force Reserve Command and said, pull my paperwork. I'm staying for this.
She served 19 more years and rose to become a 4-star general. When she achieved that rank, she was the only female 4-star officer in any branch of the United States military. She grew up in Hilliard, Ohio, playing softball with her sister Peg. They would go on to earn softball scholarships at The Ohio State University, an experience that taught her valuable lessons in perseverance. General Miller, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, Don. It is an absolute pleasure to be with you today.
Well, you've got your Ohio State gear all around you.
Yeah.
And this should be a fun way to mix the amazing career you've had serving our country and also the love you have for the Ohio State University. You know, I know you grew up in the town of Hilliard, Ohio, and attended Hilliard High School, and there softball became your sport of choice. Tell me why.
I hadn't seen a softball till I got in junior high. We grew up playing baseball. Way back when, we would literally play baseball every day after school. It took the precedent over homework many a day. So it was this, baseball was our life back then.
Wow.
So it was an automatic transition to softball because women couldn't play baseball back then.
Wow. What was it that you loved about the sport, both baseball and softball? What was it that drew you to it?
Oh, I just think, so many players out there on the team, and you've got to perform like a team, and each person has their role, and you got to play your role. And some days you perform great as a team, and sometimes, there's a hitch in what's going on there, and you got to lift each other up, and you got to get the job done. So it's all about the team. It's all about everybody's strengths and weaknesses and how you cover down when things aren't going well.
Yeah.
It relates so much to military, so much to everything we do in life.
In fact, those are the comparisons and the corollaries I'm looking forward to drawing. But I noticed as I looked at your career, you weren't just a player, right? Because you were a catcher.
Right.
I played catcher too. So I love that aspect of the game. You're the only one looking the other direction. Everybody else is looking toward you. One of the things about being catcher is the importance of body language. As I said, you got the other 8 players looking at you. How you conduct and carry yourself, they see it all. Wondering when and how that part of the game really came to you, that the importance of strength in the way you carried yourself.
I think as a player, I never made that connection. I love that you talk about it that way, about how you carry yourself, your mannerisms, your words, how you go through life is perceived by people and it's read by people. But my whole focus back then, and still to this day, is how do you execute? As a softball player, it's duty. You have a duty and you're an athlete and you need to get out there and you need to learn and you need to be the professional that you are and learn your trade. Your vocation right now is as a softball player. So learn your vocation. And then as the general of the field out there is what my coach would say, hey, you're the general of the field out there. The mission is to execute, execute, execute. let's get the mission done. And he taught us the trade, which was priceless. I can imagine what was going through his head. He came from a baseball background as the baseball coach at Ohio State to the softball program. And he's probably going, women, how does this work? But he jumped right in because he knew the game and he taught us how to execute the game. So it was a priceless experience. So I think I looked at my job as a catcher as the general of the field and the person in charge of making sure we get it right, execute correctly, call the right plays, call the right pitches. And I never really looked at it like, I got to make sure I get this right for them. I got to make sure I get this right for the team and for us as professionals. So it was a duty and it was a vocation and we had to get it right.
Yeah. I love that you were a general before you were a general. That works out pretty well. That's pretty good. No, I had the opportunity. I did a book a couple of years ago with a catcher who won the World Series for the Chicago Cubs, a guy by the name of David Ross. A lot of our discussion was about the importance of how the other 8 looking in at you, they see how you react if a pitch has been bad or a wild pitch or something's been in the dirt. If you show frustration with the pitcher or if you're upset at the way the game is being called, well, that's the way they'll all be thinking because they see it from you, their leader, their general in the field.
Yeah. And I think the dynamic that the pitcher and I had was the dynamic of the team. In my experience, it wasn't just me making sure I get this right. And if they're down, I lift them up and I'm the one that gets alignment, gets them in the right direction. I'm the one that corrects the mistakes, emotionally. I looked at it like it's the battery, it's the pitcher catcher. It's that dynamic because she was the informal leader of the team. She was the skill. She was the talent. Without Lisa Parrott, we were going to struggle. You knew you had to build on that dynamic of her and I. You had to understand the power behind the battery of the pitcher and catcher. And she and I knew the power behind that. And I would call the plays. She would listen. If she didn't like it, she would change the call or the pitch that she was going to throw. But it was that relationship back and forth that everyone watched. And if she would get upset, I'd have to go out there and go, get it together. I mean, you're the informal leader here. You cannot do this. You cannot be mad. So in essence, I did that role, but I leveraged really the battery, the informal power that she and I had together that was just so powerful.
What a great example there. Was there a Lisa Parrott-like battery partner for you as you advanced in your professional career in the military?
I always had great mentors along the way, men and women both, that would help guide me and pull me aside. And when I was younger, I didn't know to go to them and ask for help or ask for assistance or let me pass something by you. They knew to reach out. As you get older, you go, I really need to reach out to this person. As you get older, you're much more comfortable with who you are as a person and your strengths and weaknesses. And you'll go out and seek the people that are going to help you with your weaknesses and be honest with you about, the strengths that you have and keep your ego in check and all the things that come with that. You can't go through life by yourself. You've always got to have that battery of help, whether it's a mentor or your parents. My parents were the absolute foundation for me in everything I do and for my family. My sister and I talk about this all the time. My parents were perfect and they were tough. They were unconditional loving. They set the foundation for all of our success as human beings. No matter what your professional job is, it's the human aspect that really makes the difference.
I love it. I'd love to ask you what it was like to play with your sister, to have your sister as a teammate. What was that like?
We are so close that it was normal. It was normal to have Peg at third base. Usually I was standing beside her at shortstop. That was a position I played my entire life, was shortstop. It wasn't until my sister and I both got to Ohio State that we ever played fast pitch. First time I played fast pitch was trying out for the team. And I'm like, wow, this is coming in here pretty fast. But we'd always played together. We always grew up playing softball and other sports together. We were people going through high school. We lettered in every single sport. So sports was our life and it was our comfort zone and it was what we knew we were good at. And we're just best friends and we're very, she's smarter than I am. And on the athletic field, she would say, you're a little bit better than I am, right?
Oh, that's wonderful. What made athletics so important to you? I mean, to be a 9-letter athlete in high school, especially for both of you, What made athletics so important so young?
We grew up, there were 6 of us in the house. Mom and dad were just amazing parents. And I think athletics for all of us, my parents were both athletic. I remember the day playing pitch and catch and all of us were out there in the backyard and we looked at mom and we said, Mom, we're all athletes. how come you're not an athlete?
Ooh.
And she goes, give me that bat, give me that ball. So she took this bat and ball, she threw the ball up in the air, hit the ball over my neighbor's 2-story home. And she goes, how about that? And dropped the bat, walked away and be like, okay, Mom, you're the athlete, and all 8 of us would go on the golf course and Mom would drive the cart and get out and putt for my dad. And, so we grew up having sports be the gathering place. Mm-hmm. Each family has that one thing that gathers them around. Sports became that for us. To this day, every time we're together, we're outside doing something together as a sporting family. And we all, by the grace of God, had a skill in it, which always makes it more fun.
It sure does.
And it was just something that just helped bring us even closer together. It's precious.
I love it. We've already made reference to the idea that after high school, you follow your sister to Ohio State. There you're playing for Don Dungy. Mm-hmm. He actually called you in your freshman year, an article that we read, the team's most promising player, and predicted that the team would have its best season ever that year with you behind the plate. And obviously he was right. That year you all won 20 games, 12 more than they'd ever won in Buckeye history. And you reached the postseason for the first time in program history. Was there a great memory from that year, from that season where things kind of turned around for the program and you got to be right there as part of it?
I think what I remember, and I was asking Peg too, there's just so many great memories of the wins that we had. But I think what really stood out for all of us, this was 1978. 1972 was Title IX.
Right.
So we're only a couple years into Title IX.
Wow.
Peg reminded me, she says, think about this, Maryanne. Women's sports back then were nothing. Mm-hmm. There were years that you didn't even get a coach. There were certain colleges that would look around and go, hey, you teach such and such. Why don't you be the softball coach? That's the way it was in the beginning. And we finally got gloves bought for us and we finally got shoes bought. We were the beginning of Title IX. So for a Ohio State softball team to have a winning season, for people to recognize that was a big deal. For us to have a story in the paper, that was a big deal. We recognized the beginning of something that today is a given. For example, my second year, I actually got hurt and I couldn't play softball anymore. The athletic department said, we're going to pull your scholarship. Mm. And I remember going to study tables thinking, wait a minute, I sit in study table with the football players and the basketball players and everyone. And when those athletes get hurt, their scholarships continue. And they still go to study tables just to be around their buddies. And I'm thinking, why are they pulling my scholarship? I went to the athletic department. They said, no, this is what we do. And I'm going, all right. So I went back to the ROTC building. I was in ROTC at the time, talked to my colonel, who was the head of all of us. And I said, hey, this is what's going on. And he goes, oh, that's not right. Colonel Arnie Elements marched with me over to the athletic department, sat down with the athletic director and said, this is not right. And you need to change this. And if you don't, I'm going straight to the NCAA. We walked out that afternoon of his office and he says, we'll pay Maryanne scholarship the rest of her time here. It was in the very beginning parts of Title IX and in making sure there's equity there. So to compare what we did to what's going on today, it's night and day difference.
And how extraordinary that colonel stepped in for you like that, right? Yeah. Willing to say, we're going to identify what's not right here. And obviously the athletic director is a pretty powerful person on the campus, especially at Ohio State at that time, Woody Hayes days. To have walked in and had that kind of a direct conversation takes some internal fortitude, right?
That's right.
I love it. The premise of this podcast, as you know, is this idea that a disproportionate number of executives in the corporate world grew up actively engaged in sports at either high school or collegiate level, and that having had that experience helped shape the leader they would ultimately become. You obviously had the chance to play both at high school and collegiate level, and then you rose up through the ranks of the military. But would you agree that time in athletics helped shape you as a better leader?
Absolutely. The athletic fields of the courts, all the different locations that we play sports, that's the field of experience. There's no more priceless field of experience out there than an athletic field. That is where you learn prudence. You learn how to make good decisions. You learn how to be courageous. You learn self-control, which is a big one. Mm. You learn magnanimity, how you striving for great things, not only for yourself, but for your team. You learn about humility. You learn about the behaviors in life that will make you a better person. And then you've got the skill side of it. So athletics is the skill, and then it's the human aspect of who we need to grow and be as individuals. And that's why I love athletics. You can be the best athlete on the planet, but if you're not a good human being, that just doesn't go for me. Leaders, coaches, teachers, parents, part of the vocation of each one of those is to make us better human beings. And athletics does that. I love bringing people together from different economic backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds and say, you will perform as a team. Here's the mission. Here's what we're going to do. The correlation between athletics and the military is there's a direct correlation to all of this.
Yeah.
It correlates to being productive and effective further on as you move up in the ranks.
Yeah. You talked about the idea that as a military leader, you had a chance when you were moved to actually construct your own teams at different stages. Mm-hmm. Did the idea that someone had a little bit of an athletic background, if you knew them to be wired that way or having learned that way, did that play a little bit of a role in some of the people you chose to surround yourself with?
It did, in the sense of you knew where they were coming from. Mm-hmm. You know that they understood victory and they understood defeat. They understood suffering. When you're an athlete, there's a lot of suffering as you prepare and as you learn and as you grow to love your sport and your vocation at the time. And I want that in an individual. I want somebody who has gone through the hard knocks and who has picked themselves up the second they fall down and then reach out for help from their teammates when they fall down. There's the correlations. You can go on and on and on. So I knew what I was getting when I was picking an athlete. I knew the ground that they had walked, and I knew how they were going to react given certain situations. I could assume that, and I did assume that.
Well, I love the point that these elements, prudence, making good decisions, courageousness, self-control, magnanimity, the idea of wanting to be part. The other thing that's really interesting to me between sports and the military is how much time you in the military spend practicing.
Yeah.
For opportunity may or may not come your way, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you hope that what you're practicing for never happens, but practice is a key element in sports as well. Maybe in the corporate world, we don't get the chance to practice as much. It feels sometimes like we just throw people in and say, now go play. Yeah. But the idea that you all had so much experience in practice to get ready would have to help you and those that you're bringing around you if they have an athletic background.
Yeah, to your point, we spend a lot of time preparing for the day that we hope never comes.
Right.
That's part of my DNA. When I play tennis, I'd much rather hit a ball for hours with somebody, baseline to baseline, than getting out there and playing a game. I love to try to perfect what we do and prepare for those worst days that you hope never come.
Yeah, that's powerful. While you were at Ohio State, you had an opportunity to sit on a regular basis next to the same young man in the weight room. And one day he invited you to come over to see the ROTC building. Can you tell us that story?
Yes. So as an athlete, of course, you work out a lot, and we were in the weight room. I don't even remember what team he was on, but we would always be next to each other in the weight room. He had this really short hair, and I'm like, what? Which was unusual back then.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, what is your story? And he says, oh, I'm in Air Force ROTC, and I didn't know what that was. And he says, come and join and come see what we do. And I spent an afternoon with him over there. And I thought, these people, I relate to them. They're disciplined, they're obedient, they're just all the things that I am. It's pretty empowering to be 18 years old and realize, wow, that's really how I am. It was a comfortable environment to be around. These people cared, they worked hard, they were serious, they were professional, it was just a very comfortable environment to be around. I signed up right away.
Yeah. I did Army ROTC at Ball State as a sophomore. So I understood a little bit about what they were trying to teach, and it was amazing, right? How much you could learn just in the presence of some of those unbelievable people. Yeah. When you made that visit to the ROTC building, did you have any clue that it might lead to a 40-year career?
No, wasn't even sure what career it would lead to. I knew it was going to be in the Air Force. I thought to myself, these are my people. I am comfortable with them. We are a lot alike. And this is the future. I want to be a part of this. But I didn't know in what role. I thought maybe as a lawyer. I was studying law at the time and then transitioned to criminal justice and sociology. And my professor of aerospace studies, Colonel Elements, came up to me one day and said, hey, they've opened up pilot training to women. We want to put your package in. And I'm like, no, that's a guy thing. So let the guys do that. I still have 70s mentality of, no, that's a guy thing. Let the guys do that. But he says, no, we're going to put your paperwork in. And I thought, I think you're wasting your time. I only have a 3.0 average. I will be competing against 4.0 women engineering students. They're only picking 10 women across the country out of our OTC. I don't have a chance. So don't waste your time. He filled out the paperwork and I got one of the 10 slots.
Wow.
That course changed my life. Absolutely. Because then you start as a junior, they teach you how to fly. That was just so natural for me that I thought this is what I was meant to do. There's no question.
That's awesome. What groundbreaking opportunity, and how neat that he believed in you. Well, it sounds like even early on, like there were some pretty great sponsors, people who poured into you and said, I'm not just going to offer you advice. I'm going to step in and push you maybe a little further than you might feel comfortable.
Yeah. I have not actually talked to Colonel Elements, but he is living, I think, in Ohio still. And the ROTC unit said, hey, you need to at some point reach out to him, because when you think back, he corrected that scholarship issue that was going on. And he's the one that got me into pilot training. So yeah, it's amazing the people that have helped me and others along the way.
Boy, they do. Those folks, we can't have enough of them in our life. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So you begin a career, pilot training, join the Air Force, incredible. And then I understand after 20 years, you are set to retire. Your paperwork's even in.
Mm-hmm.
And then 9/11 happens. Would you tell us that story?
Actually, I was a restaurant owner at the time.
You owned a restaurant?
Yeah. I owned a restaurant in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, because I was in the reserves at the time. I was in the Air Force Reserve. I owned a 100-year-old home that I converted to a restaurant. So I lived upstairs. Restaurant was on the main floor. So I was running a restaurant and also flying airplanes at the same time and trying to balance that, which is very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
That morning, I was upstairs getting ready, and I remember just standing there watching the airplane go into the first tower. Immediately, I thought, this is some idiot flying close to the tower. I mean, you don't think that it's terrorism. As the next couple of hours progressed, and you finally knew the story, I called back to the squadron and I said, do I need to come in? And they're like, no, we don't need you yet. Just stay put, but be ready to go if we need you. We don't know what this is going to be about. This was a Tuesday. That Friday, I had called the Air Force Reserve Command and said, pull my paperwork. I'm staying for this. Mm. It was actually a very surreal time. We're 2.5 hours from DC on the beach in Delaware, and we thought that everyone in DC would kind of hunker down. No, everybody left the city. So we were inundated that Friday night. Our restaurant was just packed. A friend of mine came up and he says, Maryanne, you've got to go over to that table and talk to that man over there. And I'm like, Sam, I don't have time. We are up to our elbows in things here. He says, no, you've got to go talk to that guy. You got to hear his story. So I go over there and he stands up and turns around and gives me a big hug. And he says, are you a pilot? And I go, yeah. He goes, you're in the Air Force Reserve? I said, yeah. He says, my brother was the co-pilot of Flight 99. Mm. And then we just hugged and cried. And he goes, help me understand what happened. I said, I don't know what happened. We ended up taking him outside. I had a secret garden, and I set him up back there with his friends. And we spent the rest of the night just talking about what an amazing couple of days and how it will change the world for the United States and everyone else.
And already that day, you had made the decision to pull your paperwork.
Yeah.
Did you share that with him?
No.
No,
we were just trying to make sense of what happened.
So in that process, I assume the restaurant had to go into a different direction, or how did you handle that?
Sold it.
You sold it?
Yeah. 2 years later. So actually in that 2-year time period, I came back into the Air Force Reserve full time. So Monday through Friday, I would go into work, and then I would take a trip. I was flying C-5s, the biggest airplane in the world at the time. And I had a business partner, so she would take care of the business, and I would go on trips. And when I was in town, I would do my duty at the restaurant. So I was trying to balance full-time being a pilot and then part-time being a restaurateur. 2 years later, we finally sold because it was just way, way too much to handle.
And then you went from reserves back to full-time. Is that correct?
Right.
In that moment, when you're making this choice, when you're seeing those planes flying into the Twin Towers, when you're making a life-changing alteration, right? I'm going to pull my retirement paperwork. I mean, were you scared? Were you motivated? What was coursing through your veins in that moment?
Duty's not done. It's, you've got to put this restaurant thing aside, time to get back to what you do well. There was no question in my mind that it was time to go back full time. No question in my mind when it was time to sell the restaurant.
Wow.
Yeah. I was the second C5 into Baghdad. This is 2002. And we had landed into Baghdad, all flying in and out of Baghdad was at night. We had to run to the flight planning tent, and they said run because there may be shrapnel coming in. So we need you to run. Put your flak vest on. I need you to run to the tent. So we ran to the tent, and we're in there flight planning. I said, co-pilot, go flight plan, go get the weather. You know, we're in there doing our thing. And there was a phone that said USA Direct, and it had a little sign underneath of it. And it's just this receiver phone. And I looked at the guy running the operation, and I said, can I pick up and call anywhere in the world? He goes, anywhere in the world, pick it up and call. I'm like, great. So I picked it up, and I thought, let me just see what's happening back at the restaurant. So I called back, and my business partner picked up. I'm like, hey, Deb. She goes, where are you? I go, I'm in Baghdad. And she goes, right. I said, no, seriously, I'm in Baghdad. I said, how's it going? She goes, well, it's a Saturday night here in July, and we're really swamped. How do you think it is, right? By the way, your boss is here. And I'm thinking, my wing commander is at the restaurant. And I said, Kevin's there? And she says, no, the big boss. I don't know who you're talking about. She goes, Secretary of Defense.
Oh my God.
Secretary Rumsfeld's here. And I go, right. There is no way Secretary Rumsfeld is there in the middle of July in 2002. She says, no, honestly, what happened was they decided to get out of town for the weekend and go to the beach. Most DC folks go to the beach when they want to get away. So they ended up coming to the beach, staying at a friend of mine's B&B. Unbeknownst to us, after the fact, we're finding all this out. But the Rumsfeld had gone by the restaurant, and two of my friends, husband and wife, were sitting on the front porch, and they look down and they see the Secretary of Defense down there. And they're looking at the menu, and the secretary's going, oh, this looks like a good place. Well, a friend of mine pipes up and says, Mr. Secretary, you really ought to eat here tonight. And he goes, well, why should we eat here? And he goes, well, because a pilot owns this place and another reservist owns this place. And he goes, okay. So they ended up getting seated in the back of the restaurant. It was just a very funny exchange between the Secret Service and the hostess and my business partner. But at the end of the day, my business partner sat and had dinner with the two of them. And the secretary says, so where is your business partner? Oh, she just landed in a C5 in Baghdad.
She took a phone call from Baghdad and ended up at dinner with the defense secretary.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then the discussion happened to be about barbecue sauce, because we get our barbecue sauce from Arkansas, same place that President Clinton got it. So there was a long discussion between Rumsfeld and my business partner about should we get the ribs, the sauce that the Clintons like, and it was just hilarious. I mean, so just strange coincidences coming together. But yeah, very surreal times back then.
Love it. The world is a very small place.
Very small place.
Yeah, but the decision to come back at the time, did you have an idea that you would spend another 20 years in the Air Force when that happened?
No, I came back to fly. In fact, they said, we want you to be, the ops officer. And I said, no, I don't want to be the operations officer. I just want to be a pilot. I just want to fly. But then once we sold the restaurant, I thought, I really don't want to retire. I want to continue. I want to go full time and then go back on active duty. So I just kept saying yes to the jobs. I never pursued any jobs. I just did the best I could wherever I was. And then the opportunities just kept coming.
What a powerful lesson that is, right? If you just keep saying yes to the jobs, too many people out there got to define, like, I have to do this by this date. I have to do this. Yeah. But if you just keep saying yes to the jobs, good things happen.
And no to the jobs that you're not. I said no twice to very prestigious jobs. One was a lieutenant colonel, one was a colonel. And I said no because I was not the best person for the job. I thought, no, you do not need to pick me. You need to pick this person over here. And they fought me on it, but eventually listened. You got to pick the right team, because there's going to be a time in your life where you're not going to be able to do that. And now you've got to figure out what your weaknesses are, and you've got to be able to build the team around it to cover that up, to fill those gaps in so that you can execute the way you need to execute.
What was a weakness that you regularly looked to fill around you? A weakness that you identified in your own style that you wanted to make sure you always had real talent around you to fill?
My strength is motivating people. My strength is reaching into their hearts, understanding that they are created for greatness and we will help them get to greatness. I did want to take the time out of the positions that I was in to be that perfect expert on this one thing. So I hired experts that surrounded me. I wanted them to be the best at what they did, whether their personality fit in with, whether or not they were warm or not. I really didn't care. I needed this one specific skill. I had the vision of where we wanted to go. I'm the one that looks out into the future. I'm the one that builds the team that gets us there. In this one position I was in, I needed somebody who was going to get through the day-to-day monotony to tell me that, yes, we are making progress. So I didn't want to be spending my time on day-to-day stuff. I needed to be out into the future. I need to be looking out a year down the road at least. So just keep the day-to-day going, make sure we progress, make sure we understand where the gaps are. Let's fill those gaps. Let's make sure that we move the ball forward every day. I would tell the staff, hey, you're on one side of the wall, I'm on the other. Because I'm on this side of the wall, I get my hands on the wall, and there are days that I'm going to look around at all the factors that affect us each day, and I may push you 10 feet ahead on a day. There may be a day I wake up and I come and stand at that wall and I look at everything we've got affecting us around the world, and I may go, you know what? I'm not going to touch you. We're just going to get through the day. There may be a day I may push you just an inch, and it may be fast. That's my role, to assess the organization, understand what we're good at, understand what we're not good at, understand the gaps and how do we fill the gaps. Some gaps need to be filled quickly. Some gaps need to be filled over time. There may not be enough resources to fill the gaps that you have.
Right.
That's a weakness. So each day, that was my assessment that I made. And the staff knew and grew to understand what to feed me. There will be days that, hey, just give me the monotonous stuff. I want monotony. Because my mind's so far out there. There are times I just want the little drama you had in your office today. I need to hear that, right? But this is not what you usually do. I know, but today I just need that. Every day is an assessment of what does the team need and how do you keep them healthy in mind, body, and soul. It's an evaluation every single day and every single minute. There's a story that my command chief tells that we were right in the middle of COVID, in fact, very beginning of COVID, and those times were very stressful. We were all heads down. Here's the game plan. Every day the game plan changed because we didn't know how to transmit it.
Oh, yeah.
Every day, every hour it changed. But I said, you guys, here's the steps today. Tomorrow we may adjust. Go with these. And we were just plowing through this. My team, I could tell, was becoming under stress. And this is my team around the world. Mm-hmm. In the Pacific, they were really getting stressed because they were on the front edge of this. And they were moving people out of China, coming to the US. So there was a lot of things going on. And my command chief looked at me and goes, don't you see the stress they're under? And I go, I do, but that's just the nature of where we are right now. And he goes, you need to do something about it. And I go, they're tough people. It's okay. It's okay. No. Finally, he just took me by the shoulders and he goes, listen to me. You have to talk to them. You have to give them a pep rally. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay, you're right.
So by this stage, you're a 4-star general, correct?
Right. I'm a 4-star. Yeah. So my command chief, he goes, you need to give them a pep talk. All right. So I literally, 10 minutes before, thought, Lord, what am I going to say? But basically it was, you couldn't be doing more important work right now. And we're going to get some of this wrong. Guaranteed. That's okay. What's important is that you talked about people looking up at us and making sure we get it right. What's important is that each one of you demonstrate strength. And that's who you are. So just be you.
And that's just what they needed to hear.
Yeah. It came together, and I had 3 wing commanders right after I gave them this little pep talk, called me on the phone and said, I needed that. Thank you. I needed that. Demonstrate the strength that you have, the love that you have, the care that you have. Demonstrate that within you. There's no question we are going to technically get this right, but it's up to us to take care of the emotional side of the teams that we lead. 110,000 airmen, 1,100 airplanes. It's important that we do that. And after I got done, I was rah-rah. And I thought, Chief, thank you. That was exactly what they needed.
How awesome.
And then somebody, before they clicked off the Zoom call, they said, did somebody record that? That was awesome. It was one of those moments, the heat of the moment, right? The lesson for me was, listen to your team. I'm usually really good at that, but in that moment, I'm like, we don't have time for this. But there was not a more important thing I could do at that time.
That's awesome. That's true leadership.
Mhm.
Reading a little bit about your career, one of the things that stood out was that you actually were responsible for a period of managing Air Force One and the other aircraft that carried members of Congress. And for all of us who are so fascinated by the way you all go to work keeping leaders safe, what was it like to have that responsibility, to know that part of your work was to make sure that the infrastructure that leads our country was traveling safely through your hands?
Yeah, it was. I took over the job as commander of Air Mobility Command. That and movement of the president and his cabinet and support for the nuclear enterprise, which we did a lot, were the two most important priorities. No fail missions. And when you stop to really think about it, it could overwhelm you. But once you realized and got to know the crews, the presidential pilot and the teams and the support and the mechanics and the air crew and the flight attendants, all the infrastructure and support that goes into the movement of the president and the cabinet and, the leaders of our nation, it's so comforting and so proud of everything they do. When that wing commander at Andrews takes over and there's a change, there is a colonel that meets the president at the bottom of the steps to send him off and to receive him. There's few things that I enjoyed more than to be able to tell that next person they're going to be the wing commander that's going to stand at the bottom of those steps and meet the president when he comes and goes.
Every time.
Just the excitement in their voice.
Wow.
And you let them, relish in that. Then you go, okay, do you understand this is the biggest responsibility you will ever have in your life? And you talked about in the very beginning about being that person that's out front and having everybody watch you. Everybody watches you.
That's so true.
Everyone makes sure that you do what you need to do. And just to hear the stories of those wing commanders and the conversations with the president, priceless. Things that they will take with them the rest of their life, things that you don't talk about in public.
Yeah.
Just precious responsibilities and honors that we're given, and we understand them and we cherish them to no end. That's the greatness of what our airmen do every single day.
It's really incredible. You would go on to become the first woman to serve as chief of the Air Force Reserve, and in 2018, you became a four-star general. You're serving as the only female four-star officer in any branch of the U.S. military at that time.
Yeah.
What a rush it would have to be. But you mentioned that at one stage you weren't even sure about colonel. Could you have even fathomed the idea that four stars would rest on your shoulders there?
Not in the least.
No.
And when that phone call came from our chief of staff, General Goldfein, I was out running. I was doing a base visit in California and out on a jog before we had a series of events that night. And the phone rings and I'm thinking, oh, it's the boss. What have I forgotten? Have I forgotten something? Am I supposed to be somewhere? And I'm like, hey, chief, what's up? And he's going, hey, I want to ask you a question. Would you interview for the position of Air Mobility, Commander of Air Mobility Command? I'm like, Chief, you've got the wrong number. This is Maryanne, member reservist, Air Force reservist. And he starts laughing. He says, no, I have the absolute right number. Our nation doesn't do this. We have 7 Air Force 4-stars to give out.
7 in the entire Air Force.
And you're going to give it to an Air Force reservist? I said, Chief, can we think about this a little more? And he goes, I've thought about this. What's your answer? I said, my answer is yes. My answer is yes. And I knew, to be bluntly honest, I knew that people knew me, so it would not be about man or woman. It would be about an Air Force reservist, not the fact that I was a woman. What our Air Force did was history making and so the right thing at the time. So many of our Guard and Reserve airmen, get up and serve every day. They balance their life, they balance their job, their reserve time, which is the same as an active duty. And then they have to balance the family. And you never make any 3 of those happy at any one time. It's a very daunting challenge. So for them to take an Air Force reservist and elevate them to a 4-star was just priceless. I think it was the right thing to do for our Air Force.
Yeah. What was the rest of the run like? That's what I want to know.
It was, every day was a blessing. I retired a year early, actually, to take care of my dad, which was absolutely the right decision to make too. But every single day was a blessing. Every day was a gift from God to do the right thing for the mission and the airmen and the country. So, priceless.
Yeah.
It's for the airmen. Everything we did was for them and the mission. And I surrounded myself with an amazing team, amazing individuals. We did our job and we did it well. It was great.
You did. I read an interview with you in which you talked about the importance that to lead, you have to touch people's hearts. You've done that with me right here. My heart is touched by listening to your journey to understanding the exceptionalism of who you are and what you learned through sports and what it helped make you. Thank you for being a corporate competitor. Thank you for being an American leader. And thank you for being our guest today.
Don, it was amazing. And I follow you now, and it's the work that you do is incredible. Thank you for the impact that you make. And thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you today.
That was incredible. Maryanne's genuine heart and love for the country is evident. The great ones hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. When the next challenge presents itself, are you ready to compete? If you could share one habit, one thing you've done consistently that allowed you to separate yourself from your competitors, what would it be? In my 30-year career, 2,500 of the greatest athletes, coaches, and leaders answered that question for me.
This is Don Yeager, who did that that article I was telling you about.
Don, Dave Sims with Coach K. How you doing?
Hey, Don. How you doing, my man?
Great, sir. How are
What they gave to me is what I'm giving to you in my online course, Journey to Greatness. Through engaging storytelling and on-demand videos, you will learn the 16 habits that will jumpstart your personal growth. I will instruct you on how to apply these winning characteristics to your life through custom workbook exercises. We are slashing the price for our podcast listeners. Lifetime access to Journey to Greatness is normally $399, but for our podcast listeners, it will be $49 with the code podcast at checkout. Click the banner on corporatecompetitorpodcast.com to enroll. Thanks for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you left us a rating and a review. We will be rolling out a new episode every Wednesday. To be the first to listen, subscribe to the podcast on our website, corporatecompetitorpodcast.com. Plus, as a thank you gift, you will receive a free chapter from one of my best-selling books on the habits of high-performing teams. Stay in touch by connecting with me on social media at Don Yeager, Yaeger, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until next week, I appreciate you.